My boyfriend called me ugly and dumped me at a restaurant. He did it in front of his friends, then walked away, leaving me with the bill and a packed room of staring strangers. It was public, humiliating, and utterly soul-crushing. One moment, I was a woman happily out for dinner with her boyfriend and his colleagues. The next, I was a humiliated single woman left to pay for a meal I barely touched, questioning everything I thought I knew about the person I loved. My name is Olivia, and this happened just a few months ago with my now ex-boyfriend, Jake. We had been together for about a year and a half. Our relationship had its ups and downs like any other, but overall, I thought we were good. We had fun together, shared interests, and I felt comfortable being myself around him. He could be critical sometimes, often making little comments about my appearance or choices, but I usually brushed it off, telling myself he was just being honest or trying to be helpful. Red flag? Yeah. In retrospect, absolutely. But at the time, I just saw it as part of his personality. Jake worked at a place where he really wanted to climb the ladder, and his work friends, especially his senior colleagues, seemed important to him. He didn't often mix his work life with his personal life, so when he suggested dinner with a couple of guys from his team, I was actually excited. It felt like a sign that our relationship was serious, that he wanted to integrate me more into all parts of his life. I wanted to make a good impression. I spent extra time getting ready that evening. I picked out an outfit I felt confident in, a dress I thought was flattering and appropriate for a nice restaurant. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I was nervous, but mostly in a good way, looking forward to meeting the people Jake spent so much time with and showing them that he had great taste in partners. Cheesy, I know. We were meeting at a popular, slightly upscale restaurant downtown. When I arrived, Jake was already there, seated at a table with two other men I recognized from pictures Jake had shown me. His manager, Kevin, and another colleague, Ben. I walked over to the table, smiling, ready to say hello and join them, for what I expected to be a pleasant, if slightly formal, dinner. The atmosphere seemed fine at first glance, casual conversation flowing. But as I got closer, I noticed a slight shift, a tension I couldn't quite place. Little did I know, the worst moment of my dating life was about to unfold right there, in front of a packed restaurant. I walked up to the table, smiling, and Jake did a half stand, not quite getting up from his seat. "Hey," he said, a little coolly, before introducing me to Kevin and Ben. They were polite enough, standing briefly and offering smiles, but I immediately felt like I was interrupting something. The conversation didn't flow easily once I sat down. Jake seemed different, less warm, more performative. He talked about work incessantly, using jargon I didn't understand, trying to impress his manager, Kevin. Ben occasionally chimed in, but I mostly sat there smiling and nodding, feeling increasingly like an accessory rather than a welcomed guest. Whenever I tried to join the conversation or asked a question about their work, Jake would give me a quick, dismissive look or answer for me in a way that made me feel simple. "Oh, Olivia doesn't really get the complexities of project management," he said at one point, laughing it off with the guys, after I asked a perfectly reasonable question about their deadline. The subtle dig started early. I complimented the restaurant and Jake said, "Yeah, well, I wanted them to see I don't always go for casual places." He glanced at me when he said it. Later, talking about vacations, Kevin mentioned his wife loved exotic trips. Jake chuckled and said, "Olivia's more of a staycation and movie night kind of girl, aren't you, babe?" It wasn't just inaccurate. It felt designed to subtly highlight differences and perhaps imply my tastes weren't as refined. Each comment was small, but they were starting to sting. The main course arrived, and I had ordered the pasta, a dish I usually loved. As the waiter set the plate down in front of me, Jake looked at it, then at me, and smirked. "Really going for the carbs tonight, huh, Olivia?" he said, loud enough for Kevin and Ben to hear clearly. I felt my face getting hot. Just felt like pasta, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Yeah, well, he continued, his voice casual, but with a hard edge. You probably need to be careful with that. Wouldn't want you to let yourself go. My fork clattered against the plate. Kevin and Ben exchanged uncomfortable glances. It wasn't a subtle jab. It was a direct, cruel comment about my appearance and my food choice, made in front of his colleagues. My stomach turned. Before I could even formulate a response, before I could process the sting of the insult, he leaned back in his chair, a cold, detached look on his face. You know what, Olivia? He said, his voice flat. This isn't working. I stared at him, confused. What isn't working? Us, he said, making a dismissive gesture with his hand. This whole thing, I've been thinking about it and I'm just not feeling it anymore. We're done. My brain struggled to catch up, called me ugly, dumped me, right here, in this restaurant, in front of his manager and a colleague. It was happening so fast, so brutally. You're breaking up with me, I whispered, the humiliation and shock overwhelming me. Here? Now? He nodded, already starting to push back his chair. Kevin and Ben looked anywhere but at us. Jake stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. Yeah, he said, not meeting my eyes directly. He glanced at his friends, then back at me. And then he delivered the final blow, the words that echoed in my ears long after they left. Honestly, a girl like you should be grateful I even dated. You this long? Good luck. And with that, he turned and walked away. Kevin and Ben, looking incredibly awkward, mumbled quick apologies in my general direction, threw some money on the table, though not nearly enough to cover the bill, I'd later find out, and hurried after him. They just left. I was sitting alone at the table, in a crowded restaurant, a half-eaten plate of pasta in front of me, reeling from being called ugly, dumped, and abandoned. The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by the blood pounding in my ears and the burning heat of tears I refused to let fall. The days that followed were a blur of pain, confusion, and a deep throbbing embarrassment. It felt like the world should have stopped, but it kept turning, forcing me to navigate regular life while I was reeling from a very public, very cruel trauma. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake's face as he called me ugly, heard his words as he walked away, felt the eyes of the restaurant patrons on my back. I replayed the entire dinner over and over in my head, searching for answers, for signs I had missed. Why would he do that? Why there? Why in front of his work friends? The humiliation was a constant burning weight in my chest. It wasn't just that we broke up, it was how it happened. It felt intentionally cruel, designed to hurt and demean me in the most public way he could manage at that moment. Maya was amazing. She came over, brought comfort food, and mostly just listened. We talked for hours, dissecting the relationship, pulling apart Jake's critical comments. That wasn't just him being honest, Olivia, she said gently one afternoon, as I recounted other instances of his dismissiveness. That was him chipping away at your self-esteem. It was emotional abuse. Hearing her say the words out loud was jarring, but it also clicked. His helpful suggestions about my clothes, his jokes about my habits, his constant subtle criticisms, they weren't about making me better. They were about making me feel less than, maybe to control me, or maybe just because he was a cruel person. The public nature of the breakup added another layer of anxiety. I was terrified of running into Jake, Kevin, or Ben, terrified of running into anyone who might have been at the restaurant that night. Every time I left my apartment, I felt exposed, like everyone somehow knew what had happened. The thought of the story potentially spreading through Jake's work, or even just among his friends, made me sick to my stomach. My private heartbreak felt like public property. Jake was silent. Not a text, not a call, not an email. The man who had been a constant presence in my life for 18 months vanished completely after delivering that final brutal blow. His silence was its own kind of cruelty, confirming the coldness and lack of empathy behind his actions. There was no attempt to apologize, to explain, to even see if I was okay. It was like I was erased the moment he walked out of the restaurant, in tea. The quiet moments, between the waves of pain and anger, a slow realization dawned. Maybe the breakup, as awful as it was a bullet dodged. If he was capable of such casual cruelty, such public humiliation, after a year and a half together, what else was he capable of? The man I thought I knew, the man I loved despite his flaws, was clearly not the person I had seen that night. That person was cold, mean, and utterly selfish. The days were hard. Getting out of bed felt like a monumental task. Eating felt foreign, but Maya wouldn't let me completely withdraw. She dragged me out for short walks, made me eat, reminded me of who I was before Jake started his subtle chipping away. The path forward seemed long and daunting, filled with the wreckage of my broken heart and bruised dignity. But somewhere in the mess, a small flickering light appeared. The understanding that surviving this meant I was stronger than I thought, and that I deserved so much more than a man who would call me ugly and leave me with the bill. The noise of the restaurant slowly filtered back in, but it sounded distant, muffled. My face was burning with humiliation, and I could feel the heat radiating off my skin. I didn't dare look up, acutely aware that people at nearby tables had probably witnessed the whole scene. The sudden silence at my table, the hasty departure of 3 men, and the lone woman left sitting there with a full meal and a stunned expression. It wasn't exactly subtle. I focused on the pattern of the tablecloth, trying to disappear. Few minutes later, the waiter came over. He looked awkward. His eyes flickered to the empty chairs, then to my face, which I was sure was bright red. "Is everything all right, miss?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Yes," I lied, my voice shaky. "Everything's fine." He cleared his throat. "Okay. Would you like me to pack this up for you?" He gestured to my nearly untouched pasta. Pack it up? The physical reminder of the worst moment of my life? "No, thank you," I said quickly. "Just, could I have the bill, please?" He nodded, looking sympathetic, which only made the humiliation worse. He returned shortly, placing the leather folder on the table. My hands were trembling as I opened it. The total was exactly what I feared. Expensive. I saw the money Jake and his friends had left, a few crumpled bills that wouldn't even cover the appetizers. A wave of fresh indignation washed over me. Not only did he publicly humiliate me and dump me, but he also stuck me with the bill for his and his friend's meal. The sheer pettiness of it was astounding. I pulled out my credit card, swiping it through the machine the waiter offered. The transaction went through, cementing the reality of what had just happened. This wasn't a bad dream. It was a financially documented disaster. I signed the slip, added a decent tip, the waiter didn't deserve to suffer because my date was a jerk, and stood up, trying to project an air of calm dignity I definitely didn't feel. Walking out of the restaurant felt like walking a gauntlet. I kept my eyes straight ahead, acutely aware of the possibility of lingering stares. The cool night air outside was a relief against my hot cheeks. I finally allowed myself to take a deep, shuddering breath once I was on the sidewalk. My first instinct was to call my best friend, Maya. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. When she answered, her cheerful, "Hey, how's dinner?" made me choke up. "Maya," I said, my voice thick with tears I was finally letting fall. "You are not going to believe what just happened." I found a quiet spot on a nearby bench and recounted the entire horrifying ordeal, the uncomfortable dinner, the cruel comments, him calling me ugly, the abrupt breakup, leaving me with the bill. The words tumbled out in a rush, punctuated by sobs. Maya listened in stunned silence, her gasps and exclamations of disbelief punctuating my story. "He did what?" she yelled at one point. "Called you ugly? And left you with the bill? What kind of monster?" By the time I finished, I was emotionally exhausted, but telling her helped. It made it feel slightly more real, and her outrage was a mirror to my own. She insisted on coming over immediately. Sitting on my couch later that night, recounting the story again through tears and sniffling, the initial shock started to wear off, replaced by the full, crushing weight of the betrayal and humiliation. Not only had the man I loved publicly torn me down and abandoned me, but he had done it in a way that felt deliberately cruel and cowardly. The leftover pasta and the receipt I had shoved into my purse felt like tangible, awful proof of the night. My heart was broken, and my dignity was trampled in front of a room full of strangers. The raw grief of the first few days slowly started to mix with a simmering anger. As the shock subsided, the sheer unfairness of it all became overwhelming. It wasn't just the breakup, it was the deliberate cruelty, the public humiliation, and the audacity of leaving me with the bill. I kept replaying the scene, focusing less on my own pain and more on Jake's face, his cold tone, the uncomfortable glances exchanged by his friends. Why? Why do it like that? Maya and I spent hours talking, trying to dissect his motives. Maybe he was trying to look tough in front of his work friends, Maya suggested one night. Like, asserting his independence or something? By calling me ugly and abandoning me? I scoffed. That doesn't make him look tough. It makes him look like a complete jerk. A cowardly jerk. We talked about whether his constant criticisms during the relationship were leading up to this. Whether he was trying to chip away at my confidence so the final blow would land harder. It felt like putting together pieces of a puzzle, but the picture that emerged was uglier than I could have imagined. He wasn't just casually mean, he was deliberately demeaning. The injustice of the bill also gnawed at me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the principle. He had used me to entertain his friends, then discarded me and made me pay for it. It felt like a final act of disrespect. I found the receipt shoved in my purse a few days later, a crumpled, damning piece of evidence. Staring at the total, I felt a surge of anger powerful enough to momentarily override the hurt. I needed some kind of closure, not for him, but for me. Not a reconciliation, never that, but just acknowledgement. An admission from him that what he did was messed up. I knew trying to get a sincere apology from someone capable of that level of cruelty was probably futile, but I felt a strong need to state my piece, not as a heartbroken victim, but as someone who saw him for who he was. Against Maya's advice, "Don't engage, Liv, he's not worth it," I decided to send him a message. I spent hours drafting it, deleting, redrafting. I didn't want to sound emotional or begging. I wanted to be clear, calm, and cutting. Finally, I sent it. Subject: Last Friday. Jake. I'm not writing this because I want to get back together or get an explanation. I'm writing because you owe me an apology for two things: calling me ugly and dumping me in public and sticking me with a $300 bill for a dinner you and your friends ate. What you did was cruel and cowardly. It shows exactly the kind of person you are. Don't contact me again. Sending it felt like a small act of defiance, a way to reclaim a tiny bit of power in a situation where I felt completely powerless. I didn't expect a response, or maybe I expected an angry one. His actual reply, which came a few hours later, was worse than anger. LOL, still hung up on that? Move on. That was it. 4 words. No apology, no explanation, just complete dismissal and a mockery of my feelings. Still hung up on that? As if being publicly humiliated and dumped over my appearance wasn't a big deal. Reading his response was like a final cold shower. It washed away any lingering hope that there was some misunderstanding, some hidden reason for his behavior. It confirmed the worst. He was just a cruel, unapologetic person. The pain of the breakup was still there, but his flippant response hardened my resolve. There was no going back, no explanation that would ever make it okay. The man I thought I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who felt no remorse for his actions. The chapter of trying to understand him was closed. Now it was time to focus entirely on healing and moving forward without him. His response, "LOL, still hung up on that? Move on," landed like a final, dismissive slap. For a second, I just stared at the screen. The sheer lack of empathy, the casual cruelty of it, took my breath away. Still hung up on that? It had only been a week. Was he serious? The audacity was astounding. But after the initial shock wore off, his message had a strange effect. It killed any last, lingering doubt or hope that there was a redeemable person underneath. It confirmed that the man who had publicly humiliated me and left me with the bill felt zero remorse. He wasn't confused, he wasn't scared, he was just a jerk. And that clarity was, oddly, freeing. There was nothing more to understand about him. No explanation coming, no apology on the horizon. My focus shifted completely. It was no longer about why he did it, but about how I was going to move past it. His message was the final push I needed to stop dwelling on him and start focusing entirely on myself. The next day, I went through my apartment like a woman on a mission. I boxed up every single thing that belonged to Jake or reminded me of him. Gifts he'd given me, clothes he'd left behind, even little trinkets from trips we'd taken. I didn't do it sadly. I did it with a quiet, determined anger. I changed my phone background, deleted old photos from my camera roll, or moved them to a hidden folder I wouldn't look at, and muted him on social media just in case. Out of sight, out of mind, or at least out of immediate painful reminders. I leaned heavily on Maya. She helped me go through the box of Jake's things, providing moral support and cracking jokes that, for the first time since that night, actually made me laugh. We talked about reclaiming my space, literally and figuratively. I rearranged my living room furniture, bought some new plants, made my apartment feel less like a place we shared, and more like my sanctuary. I also made a conscious effort to revisit things I loved doing that had maybe taken a back seat during the relationship. I went back to my yoga class, started reading for pleasure again, and planned outings with friends I hadn't seen enough of lately. It was slow going. Some days were better than others, but each small act of normalcy, each moment of genuine connection, felt like a victory against the isolation and embarrassment I had felt. The public nature of the breakup was still a lingering worry, but I decided I wouldn't hide. If someone asked about Jake, I would simply say we broke up. If they pressed, and thankfully most people are too polite or too awkward to pry deep, I'd give a brief, factual version. It ended pretty suddenly, and not well. I wasn't going to let his cruel actions make me feel ashamed. My worth wasn't determined by his opinion or the terrible way he chose to end things. That night was about his character, not mine. Slowly, the burning in my chest began to subside. The replay of the restaurant scene became less frequent. The sting of ugly started to lose its power, replaced by Maya's reminders of my real strengths and the love of people who actually valued me. I was still healing, still bruised, but I was no longer frozen by the humiliation. I was actively moving forward, leaving the restaurant disaster and the man who caused it behind, and starting to rebuild my confidence, piece by careful piece. The initial weeks after the breakup were tough, a mix of raw pain and determined action. But slowly, as I continued to focus on myself, lean on my support system, and process what had happened, the healing began to deepen. The good days started to outnumber the bad ones. Laughter felt more genuine, sleep came easier, and the constant replay of that awful night in the restaurant started to fade. Reclaiming my confidence was a conscious effort. Jake's comment about my appearance had hit a nerve, targeting an insecurity I didn't even fully realize I had. I started by focusing on things that made me feel good, not things I thought anyone else would approve of. I bought some new clothes that I loved, not because they were trendy or flattering in a way someone else would appreciate, but because they made me feel comfortable and confident in my own skin. I spent more time on my hobbies, like painting, where the only critic was myself. I started exercising not to change my body because of what Jake said, but because it made me feel strong and capable. Maya was my biggest cheerleader. She'd point out my strengths, remind me of accomplishments, and gently counter any negative self-talk. Getting compliments from others started to feel genuine again, not like something I had to earn, or something that could be taken away by a cruel word. I realized that Jake's comment wasn't a reflection of my worth or how I looked. It was a reflection of his meanness and insecurity. People who truly care about you don't tear you down, especially not in public. Months passed. Tapuyu. Sharp edges of the pain became smoother. The story of the breakup, once agonizing to recall, became a cautionary tale I could share with a mix of lingering disbelief and dark humor. It was still a part of my history, but it no longer defined me. I hadn't seen or heard from Jake since his dismissive text, which was a relief. The complete radio silence after such a dramatic exit felt like a final confirmation of his character. However, life has a strange way of bringing things full circle. One evening, I was out for dinner, with Maya at a casual spot downtown, and I saw him. He was sitting a few tables away with a group of people, laughing loudly. He looked unremarkable. Just a guy at a table. The sight of him didn't send me into a spiral of panic or sadness like it would have months ago. There was a brief, automatic clench in my stomach, but it quickly passed. I looked at him. Really, looked at the man who had caused me so much pain, and felt surprisingly little. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet sense of detachment. He was just a guy who had revealed himself to be cruel, and I was grateful he was no longer in my life. I didn't acknowledge him, and he didn't seem to see me. We just continued our dinner, our conversation flowing easily, filled with laughter and genuine connection. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. I was out, enjoying myself, with a friend who truly valued me in a public place, and seeing him didn't break me. It showed me how far I had come. Looking back at the relationship, now the red flags that seemed subtle at the time are glaringly obvious. His constant criticism wasn't just a personality trait. It was a pattern of behavior designed to control or diminish. The breakup, as awful as it was necessary. It was a brutal way to learn a lesson, but I learned it. I learned about the importance of self-worth, of listening to my gut, and of surrounding myself with people who build you up, not tear you down. The idea of dating again still felt a little daunting, but no longer impossible. I wasn't rushing into anything, but I was open to the possibility of meeting someone new someday, someone who would see me and appreciate me for who I am. Ugly comments not included. I had survived the public humiliation, paid the literal and emotional bill, and come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more confident than I had been before. It's been well over a year now since that night at the restaurant. The memory is still there, a vivid snapshot tucked away in the album of my past experiences. It's no longer a painful, raw wound, but a healed scar, a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come. The initial shock, the deep humiliation, the confusion, and the anger have all faded, processed and transformed into something resembling wisdom. That experience was, without a doubt, one of the worst moments of my life. Being publicly torn down and abandoned by someone I cared about cut deep, but looking back now, I can see it as a catalyst, It forced me to confront not just Jake's cruelty, but my own willingness to accept less than I deserved, to dismiss red flags, and to let someone else's opinion chip away at my self-worth. The lessons learned were invaluable, albeit painfully acquired. I learned that someone's behavior, especially cruel behavior, is almost always a reflection of them, not you. Jake calling me ugly wasn't about me. It was about his need to assert some pathetic form of power or impress his friends. I learned that true confidence comes from within, and you can't let anyone else define your worth. I learned to trust my gut implicitly. That little voice that whispered unease during the relationship was trying to warn me. And I learned the immense value of true friends, like Maya, who show up and support you when your world is falling apart. My life today is built on a much more solid foundation. I'm happier, more confident, and more at peace than I was when I was with Jake. I'm no longer afraid of running into him or his friends. That fear has been replaced by a quiet indifference. The public humiliation he intended to inflict didn't break me. It tempered me. It showed me that I could survive something truly awful and come out stronger on the other side. I'm dating again, and this time I'm approaching relationships with open eyes and clear boundaries. I'm looking for kindness, respect, honesty, and genuine connection, not charm or flashiness. I know my worth, and I won't let anyone diminish it. That night at the restaurant was the dramatic, painful ending to a relationship that should have ended sooner. It was a moment of humiliation, but it led me on a path of self-discovery and healing. The man who called me ugly and left me with the bill thought he was leaving me with nothing. But in reality, he left me with the opportunity to rebuild my life, stronger and more authentically than ever before. And for that, strangely enough, I am now grateful